Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into the very beginning of life to understand something incredible, how our first few months can literally set the stage for our future. So let's jump right in. You've probably heard the old nature versus nurture debate, right? Well, what's so fascinating is the science now showing just how deeply our earliest environment, even before we're born, is tied to who we become years down the line.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start in the womb with what's called the prenatal programmer. Then we'll look at the moment of birth, things like weight and gestational weeks. After that, we'll see how this all echoes into childhood. And finally, we'll pull it all together for the big picture.
Our story really kicks off way before we take our first breath. Those 9 months in the womb, they're not just a waiting game. It's an incredibly active time where the very foundations of our biology are being programmed.
And one of the key programmers here is a hormone you've definitely heard of, cortisol. We usually think of it as the stress hormone, right? But during pregnancy, it has this amazing, kind of double agent role. It's less of a stress signal and more like a get-ready signal, helping the fetus mature everything from the brain to the lungs for life on the outside. But here's where it gets really interesting. It's all about the timing. Everything. Research shows that cortisol's job completely flips depending on when it shows up. Too much cortisol early on? Yeah, that can cause some problems. But later in the pregnancy? Well, that's a whole different story.
In fact, one study that followed mothers and kids over a long time found that higher cortisol levels in that final trimester were actually linked to some really positive things later on. It was associated with a thicker frontal cortex in the brain and even better cognitive skills when the kids were between 6 and 9 years old. It's a clear signal of healthy maturation.
Okay, so the stage is set in the womb. Now, let's fast forward to the main event, birth itself. Because this moment, this transition into the world has its own set of factors, like birth weight and gestational age, that leave their own lasting blueprint.
And to really get to the bottom of this, scientists did something pretty incredible. They didn't just rely on one study. Nope, they brought together data from 10 huge international studies. It's called a meta-analysis. And you can think of it like this. It's like combining the power of 10 massive telescopes to see a star that's just too faint to spot with one. It gives them way more power to see the real patterns.
And the pattern they found, well, it was impossible to ignore. For kids born very preterm, we're talking before 32 weeks, or with a very low birth weight, the challenges don't just magically vanish. They actually face a much higher risk for certain psychiatric conditions, and this risk follows them from childhood right into their adult years.
So, what does higher risk actually look like? Well, compared to their peers born full term, these individuals had, get this, 10 times the odds of meeting the criteria for autism spectrum disorder.
And for ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, the odds were 5 times higher.
And for an anxiety disorder, they faced double the odds. These are not small numbers. They really highlight just how vulnerable a very early start to life can be.
But here's the thing, it's not just about the extremes. Another huge study found something fascinating when they looked at birth weight across the board. It seems there's this continuous effect where literally every extra ounce at birth offers a little bit more protection.
And what is it protecting? Something called health-related quality of life. Now that might sound a bit clinical, but it's actually a really holistic idea. It's not just about physical health. It's the whole shebang, a child's emotional state, how they're doing socially, how they're managing in school. Basically, it's a great snapshot of their overall well-being. Okay, so we've got these prenatal signals and we've got the impact of birth itself. Now let's bring it all together and see how these pieces connect, creating these long echoes that we can hear years later in childhood.
And this table just lays it out so clearly, doesn't it? You can see the threads connecting everything. On one side, you have things like that late pregnancy cortisol boost, which helps with brain development. And on the other, you have the circumstances of birth, where being born too small or too early can increase the risk for future challenges. Every single one of these early factors leaves an impression that lasts for years.
All right, let's step back from the specific data for a second and just think about what this all means. The big picture.
When you put all this research together, it points to something pretty profound. Our health story doesn't start the day we're born. It starts way before we ever take our first breath. The actual blueprint for our health, our brain function, and our mental well-being is being drawn up in those very first stages of life.
So, what are the main takeaways here? First, the environment in the womb is actively programming our future. Second,
The details of our birth are really powerful predictors, but, and this is so important, these are statistical risks. They don't seal anyone's fate. And finally, maybe the biggest point of all, is that supporting the health of moms and babies isn't just a personal matter. It's absolutely critical for building a healthy society for everyone.
And that leaves us with a really powerful question to chew on. If so much of a child's story is already written before they're even born, shouldn't that completely change how we think about supporting mothers and infants and how we invest in their health from the very, very beginning?